Perfect. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the PT on Ice Daily Show. My name is Rachel Selina, and I'm a faculty member within our Endurance Athlete Division. So I'm happy to be here on a Fitness Athlete Friday. Before we get too far, I do want to call out here, right? This is our last episode of the Daily Show that you will be able to find here either on Instagram or on YouTube. Right, on Monday, starting next week, Monday, April 7th, our daily show episodes will only be happening inside of the Ice Physio app. Right, so make sure you get yourself over to the app. Right, you can make a free account if you don't have one yet. The daily show will be happening in our free space. Right, you don't have to have taken a course before. You don't have to be currently enrolled in a course, but go over to the Ice Physio app, get yourself set up with an account so that you can keep getting our daily show episodes, right? We're going to do them right inside the app space. What you will continue to find here on Instagram, well, not on Instagram, actually, just where you usually would find your podcasts, right? You're going to start finding our weekly episodes, right? We're shifting to a longer form podcast that will be out most weeks, okay, maybe not all of them, but you're going to find that longer form deep dive type of podcast. So our first one came out earlier this week. So go ahead and watch that. But that's what you're going to start finding in our podcast areas now, wherever you get podcasts. And the daily show with kind of the topics from across our faculty every single day will still be happening inside the Ice Physio app. Cool. So we hope we see you over there. Today we're going to dive in a little bit to caffeine supplementation in endurance athletes. And caffeine is one of the most kind of widely researched ergogenic aids for athletes in general, right? It was part of 5 supplements that was in an article titled "The Top 5 Can't Miss Sports Supplements." Okay, that came out in 2024, and it was a review of the most effective ergogenic aids for athletes that had the most robust evidence for both safety and efficacy. Okay, so caffeine was one of them. On there also is beta-alanine, okay, creatine, nitrates, and protein. But we're going to focus on caffeine, right? That's especially in the endurance athlete world, that is one of the most widely used supplements or aids. We're going to kind of deep dive a little bit into kind of first what did that. So that the paper was really nice. It laid out kind of what's the research behind it, what's it supposed to be doing, and then how much, like what are the research protocols using this supplement? So how much would someone need to take to get that same effect? Okay, so for caffeine, right, what it does first, okay, why would people choose to use caffeine? Obviously, kind of in the general population, we might use it to feel more awake. But when our endurance athletes are using it in a performance boosting setting, right, caffeine can boost performance. It can also increase mental focus, right? And it's reported to increase someone's perceived energy. Okay, keeps us alert, keeps us awake. What it's doing in the body, though, so kind of physiologically what caffeine is doing when we ingest it, especially in these doses that we'll talk about, that we might need to get to be effective, right? Caffeine is increasing fatty acid utilization. So what that means is that the athlete might get a glycogen sparing effect, okay, which is really good because that's something that, especially again in our long distance, long duration events, right, we have to replenish glucose in the body. So if we can spare some of that muscle glycogen, right, we may have energy within the body that can last longer. So it's glycogen sparing. Caffeine also increases the release of calcium into the blood. Okay, so that in turn increases our skeletal muscle contraction capability. Again, good. Our endurance athletes are out doing long duration events where they need to be able to contract and relax their muscles efficiently over and over and over again. And then finally, caffeine increases the release of dopamine and norepinephrine, right? And that's what is reported to be responsible for that boost in mood, for improved mood. Sometimes it's reported as a decreased perception of pain. Okay, so good things that all could benefit our endurance athletes and that have been reported in studies as effects of taking caffeine. Okay, there's a lot we could deep dive into here, but whether that's taking caffeine just before an event or training, during an event. Okay, it can be administered at different points in time. But what the International Society of Sport Nutrition recommends, okay, if an athlete chooses to use caffeine as a supplement, as an ergogenic aid, they recommend the recommended dose is based on body weight, right? So the recommended dose is 3 to 6 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram body weight. Okay. For me, right, to put this in context, I'm 60, I don't know how many kilograms I have to always do that math. I weigh 135 pounds. So for me, 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine would mean I need to ingest 184 to 368 milligrams of caffeine to get that ergogenic effect, that performance boosting effect. Okay. The dose for cognitive improvement has been shown to be a little bit less. Okay, so if I just want those mood boosting effects, that dose is recommended at 1 to 3 milligrams per kilogram body weight. So for me personally, I would need to ingest 61 to 184 milligrams of caffeine. Okay? And the recommendation is that caffeine is ingested 30 to 60 minutes prior to exercise. Okay? So for reference, right, caffeine's in coffee, it's in chocolate, it's in energy drinks. Now there's a whole bunch of kind of like performance products that have caffeine in them. So are goos, like shot blocks, that kind of thing. There's gum with caffeine in it, right? 12 ounces of coffee can range from about 150 to 200 milligrams. Okay? Usually it's referenced in the 8-ounce cup, but like hardly anyone drinks an 8-ounce cup of coffee, especially if you're going to a coffee shop or anything. It's usually bigger. So 12 ounces of coffee, 150 to 200 milligrams. A shot of espresso, okay, 110. A Bang, like the energy drink, is 300 milligrams. The goo gels, like the gel supplements you see a lot of people running with, those have about 35 milligrams of caffeine. That's just the one brand, right? There's obviously different ones that have more or less. The caffeinated gum typically has 60 to 125 milligrams of caffeine. And then the Cliff Shot blocks, like the big chewy blocks, are usually 25 to 50 milligrams of caffeine per serving. So you can kind of start to appreciate, right? Like to hit that high, especially if you're aiming for that higher end, that 6 milligrams per kilogram body weight, you have to ingest a decent amount of caffeine, right? You have to either drink a lot of fluid or ingest a lot of kind of these gel type products. Okay. So that's what is recommended, okay, based on the research that we have, okay, kind of pooling that data. The recommendation for caffeine as an ergogenic aid is that, because you could argue one, if you want just the mental effect, 1 to 3 milligrams per kilogram body weight, or up higher at 3 to 6 kilograms or milligrams per kilogram body weight for a performance boosting effect, right? So relatively high and based on body weight, and it should be ingested 30 to 60 minutes before activity. So what was interesting, okay, there's another study I looked at that was a survey of endurance athletes, right, to get an understanding of what are their dosing strategies if they're using caffeine. Okay, and what that study found, right, was that the protocols people used, if they actually had a protocol, varied quite widely. Right? There was not a consistent dosing pattern, especially not one that followed those recommendations, right? So when they asked where people got their where these athletes got their recommendations, right, for their strategy for taking caffeine, right, only 3% of those athletes got their recommendation from either a dietitian or a nutritionist. Okay, the majority of people were getting their recommendations from a coach, from a friend, from an athlete, from a website, right? They weren't getting it necessarily from reliable sources. Okay. The other thing is that people showed very inconsistent timing for this dosing, right? They didn't all take the caffeine as recommended 30 to 60 minutes before activity. Like most, well, not quite most, 49% of them, right, took the caffeine less than 30 minutes before their activity. So again, kind of not consistent with what is actually recommended. Okay. And then people took a very inconsistent amount, right? This one's crazy to me. 72% had no specific amount that they ingested, which means they either just took caffeine off of feeling, right? How much do I feel like I need, or how much do I want to take today? Or they took it based off of just like, I like this gel, and so that gel has this amount of caffeine in it, so that's how much caffeine I'm going to take. But it was not, it was across the board a specific kind of pre-planned based on body weight, like the recommended effect. Okay. Now, we do have to keep in mind, like, caffeine is not this magic answer to everything, even if like people use it right. Like, we could argue from this, like, oh, well, people aren't getting all the ergogenic effect from caffeine because they're not using it correctly, which could be true. But caffeine also is not the thing for everyone, right? People process caffeine differently based on their genetics. So being able to figure out whether you're working with a nutritionist or doing some kind of genomic testing, whatever you want to do, if someone is really intent on getting all that they can get out of this ergogenic aid, that might be something they want to look into, right? Beyond that, we can just start with, hey, can we try to get to the recommended doses, right? Can we try to utilize caffeine as it's been recommended to do so? Some of the big takeaways from this, kind of looking at the recommendations and then looking at that survey data, right? Athletes may need higher doses to see benefit from caffeine than what is kind of the typical dosing pattern, right? And this study was looking at professional athletes, recreational athletes, and college athletes. The other thing we could be helpful with, like talking over with our patients, is talking about that timing, right? Peak concentrations for caffeine in the body, okay, they peak at different times depending on whether we take that caffeine in a fasted state or in a fed state. Okay, so if you have fasted, you don't have food in your system, right? Caffeine concentration will peak at about 60 minutes. Okay, and that's kind of that, like, why you might want to ingest caffeine 30 to 60 minutes before your event or before your training. In a fed state, right, when someone has food in their system, caffeine might not peak until 180 minutes. Okay, so we're talking about a difference between 1 hour peaking and 3 hours peaking. You know? That doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong to take caffeine when you're fed versus fasted, but it will change what that athlete's dosing strategy is. So it has to match, the dose has to match what that person's intention is. Are they going to be fed or are they going to be fasted? Right? The duration of their event is also important. If someone is running a marathon and they're going to be running for 4 hours, it might make sense for their peak of caffeine to happen 3 hours in. Okay, if someone's event is less than an hour, we're going to want that effect much sooner, right? If it peaks at 180 minutes, the event's already over. So helping someone dial in both their dosage, but also their timing for that dosage can be really helpful. Right? And then it seems that delivery is also important, right? In terms of how quickly we access that caffeine. So something like the gum, where you're chewing and it's going into your saliva, that is received by the body faster. So we see faster times to peak concentration, as opposed to if you ingest caffeine alongside of carbohydrates. So think of some of those like gels or maybe protein, not protein, like beverages that you might drink during racing, like the hydration stuff. If that has caffeine in it, but it also has carbohydrate, right, that can impact how quickly that's going to be absorbed in your system and how quickly that athlete feels the effect of caffeine, right? So all things, those are, I'm going to link those two articles in the description on Instagram, but they both were really interesting. One, if you're interested, maybe not in endurance athletes, some of the other supplements in that top 5, it goes through whether they're, what the research is more for like power, short-term output, or long-term kind of endurance output. So read through that article, and then the caffeine one was interesting, right? But definitely just calls to mind, there are things that we can do, right? Like I don't like to overemphasize using supplements. I think there's some big pieces that athletes can work on first that, maybe are more important to have dialed in, like sleep and nutrition. But for the athletes that really want that next step, or they're really interested in it, right? We have research supplements that are safe and effective. So helping those patients to dial in the most effective dose can be really helpful. Okay. If you are interested in working with endurance athletes, right, we have our next cohort for rehabilitation of the injured runner online starts May 13th. So that one's open on the website right now. And then we have a couple live courses coming up as well. So Rehabilitation of the Injured Runner Live. Your next chance to see that is May 17, 18 in Bismarck. And then Megan will be out in Bend, Oregon, June 7, 8. And then finally, we have a bunch more this year, but the next one coming up after that is June 21, 22 out in Boise, Idaho. So I'll be at that one. I'd love to see you there. Again, don't forget, this is the absolute, I'm happy to be here for it, the absolute last daily show episode on Instagram and YouTube. So head on over to the Ice Physio app, right? You can do that on mobile, just the Ice Physio app, or you can get it on the website, which is app.ptonice.com. Gotta think about that one. But yeah, come join us over in that community. We will keep doing our daily show starting next week in the app. All right, have a great weekend, everyone.